Last week, if you remember, we said that the Bible has come out of the experience, the religious experience of the Jews, the Israelites. And what was their experience of God? This is what we want to look at today. Their experience was guided by God. They had a unique experience of God, and this is an inspired experience. And it is this experience which they eventually wrote down in the Bible itself. What was the first thing they thought of God? They had a unique experience, different from every other nation in the world. Every nation had gods. Every nation had its own gods, and many gods. But the Israelites only had one God. They believed in one God. God was one. True, in the beginning, as they developed, they may have thought that other gods were there, but their God, whom they called Yahweh, was always superior to all other gods of all other nations. He was the mighty God. And in the course of time, they came to see that God was one. There is only one God, and He is the creator of the world. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one Lord." And this is the basic faith of the Israelites. And even to this day, pious Jews will recite this every day. "Listen, Israel, the Lord our God is the one Lord. And so you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." This is the first and fundamental experience that they had of God, that God is one, and there can be no idolatry. And this grew over the centuries, and is unique to Israel. All other nations throughout the world have had many gods. Only in Israel was there one God, and He is the Lord and Creator of the world. This belief in one God is contained throughout the Old Testament, starting with Genesis. In 587, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. They attacked the city, they besieged it, and eventually they broke into it, destroyed the city, and destroyed the temple also. And then they took the nation into captivity in Babylon. And Babylon in those days, you might say, was the superpower of the region, advanced in every way. It was on the river Euphrates, the great river. And when the Jews went there to Babylon, they were amazed at seeing the mighty buildings and to seeing the great development of Babylon compared to the backwater of Jerusalem. They were amazed. But there was one thing that disgusted them, and that was when they saw their religious plays, their myths about the creation of the world, of gods and goddesses, of conflicting with one another and fighting one another, and human beings being made out of the blood of a goddess and the slime of the earth, created in order to serve the gods. When they saw these dramas on the stage, they were disgusted, and they wrote their own mythology of creation. where they show that God is only one, and He is the God who hovers over the primordial waters, and He speaks, and the world is made. Let there be light, and light is made. And everything, inanimate creation, animate creation, and then human beings, let them be made in our own image and likeness. God says in their story that man and woman is made in the image of God. God is one. This is the basic and the fundamental truth that the Israelites experienced about God. And so the greatest sin is the sin of idolatry. And in those days, the Jews always had a problem with idolatry, because all their surrounding nations, they were worshipping other gods, and they were powerful people. Not the gods, I mean the nations were powerful nations. And their gods, they worshipped. And the Israelites and the Jews were tempted always to follow those gods. It's the same today. Don't think that we don't have idolatry today. There are so many idols in the world. You know, what do we want most of all? What do we give our hearts to most of all? And you will find that many people, they give their hearts to earning wealth. That is the goal of life, to earn money. And we reach out to that. We want it, because if we have money, we think, then we will be happy. Then everything will be fine. Or maybe power. If I get power, then my life will blossom and I'll be satisfied. Or pleasure, or science and technology. These, we reach out, they will give us everything that we are looking for. Religious and political ideologies, these become the idols of our life. There are many idols. The Jews were tempted to worship crude idols that other nations were worshipping. We are also tempted to go after wealth, to go after power, or to go after pleasure, or to go after science and technology as the answer to everything. These are all idols. They will not satisfy us. Temptation today is just the same as it was in those days. There's only one God, and that one God is the one who will give us everything that we are looking for. We are restless. St. Augustine told us, we are restless until we rest in you. We are made by God, and we are made for God. And it's only when we will rest in God that we will have all our desires fulfilled. And this is basically the belief of the Israelites. They have given us the faith in the one true God. And He is the answer to all human problems. If only we understand what He is saying to us. And He speaks to us through the Bible. One of the great heroes of the Old Testament and of the Jewish history is a man called Moses. Moses was born in Egypt. He was born a Hebrew, and the Pharaoh wanted to destroy the Hebrews, as we read in the book of Exodus. And so all Hebrew male children were to be thrown into the river Nile and drowned. But Moses was saved. His mother put him into a wicker basket covered with tar and floated him on the river Nile. And the sister of Pharaoh, when she came down with her maids to bathe, she saw this basket and opened it, and the child inside was so beautiful that she was captivated by this child and wanted to adopt it, even though it was the child of the slaves who were Hebrews. She decided to adopt Moses, and she gave him the name Moses. And Moses was brought up as a prince of Egypt. But then he never lost contact with his own people. And one day when an Egyptian was beating one of the Hebrews, Moses killed that Egyptian. He thought no one had seen it. But next day when two Hebrews were fighting, he said, "Why are you fighting? You are brothers." And he said, "You're going to kill us as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And immediately Moses realized that Pharaoh would come to know. And so he ran away, escaped from Egypt. And in the course of time, he became a shepherd. And there one day as he was shepherding his sheep, he sees the burning bush. And the bush is burning, but it doesn't burn out. And so he goes to investigate. And then God speaks to him, "Moses, Moses, take off your shoes, you are on holy ground." Moses falls on his face in worship of God. I have seen the problems of my people. I have seen their suffering, and I have heard their cries, and I have come down to liberate them. And the God of the Israelites is the God who is the God of slaves. He comes down to liberate those who are oppressed. This is the God of the Israelites. He is not the God of the pharaohs. He is the God of the weak, of the poor, and of the oppressed. This is another insight, inspired insight, that was given to the Israelites. Let's take a break now. Welcome back to the Word of God. We've seen that the great insight given to them by God Himself is that God is one. There are not many gods. There is only one God, who is the creator of the world and of everything that we see. He is the cause of this wonderful world in which we are living. And the Israelites also realized by God's inspiration that God was not the God of the pharaohs, not the God of the rulers who took the part of the kings. No, He was the God who came down and saw the misery of His people and came to liberate them and bring them out into a land of flowing with milk and honey. And so Moses was sent back to Egypt. He didn't want to go. He had fled from Egypt. It was the last place in the world that he wanted to go. But God said, "Go, and I will be with you. And I will see that you bring out my people, because I will bring them out." And the story of the Exodus from Egypt through the Red Sea. And they came to the holy mountain of Horeb, Sinai. And here is the very center of the Old Testament. This is where we actually see how the Israelites understood God. God of the oppressed, God of the outcast, God who came down and felt the pain of his people. And now they come to Horeb, and they are going to, God is going to make a covenant with them. He had made a covenant with Abraham before. Abraham is their father. He made a covenant with him, promised him a nation, promised him a land. And Abraham had believed in God, although he was an old man of 75, and he was 100 by the time he had a son. Abraham believed in God, and God considered him blessed because of that. And then Abraham's son Isaac and Jacob and the sons of Jacob, and they're going down into Egypt. And God never forgot his covenant with Abraham, that these were his people. And God is a faithful God. Another insight of the Israelites: God is a faithful God. His word is like silver 7 times refined. God will always be faithful to his word. He will always fulfill the promises that he has made. And so when the Israelites in slavery cry out to God, God hears their cry. And he sends the Savior, who is Moses. But it's not Moses who saves them, it's God who saves them through Moses. God, by the power of his arm, brings them out and brings them to Sinai. And this is the center of the Old Testament. This is the center of the history of the Israelite people. On Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with them. A covenant, we must understand the word covenant. It's not just an agreement. Because if an agreement is when I promise to do something for you and you promise to do something for me, and we agree on that. For instance, I want to buy some land, you want to sell some land, and I promise to pay so much and you agree to that. We make an agreement, and I pay and you give, and then the agreement, that is finished. You may go your way and I go my way. I have the land and you have the money, and you go your way and I go my way. That's an agreement. A covenant is something different. God makes a covenant with his people. It's not just an agreement. You keep my commandments and I'll bless you. No, it's not that. A covenant is like a marriage vow, a marriage relationship, you might say. When one man marries a woman, he doesn't just make an agreement with her. He gives his life to her, and she gives her life to him, and they become one life. And if it is a true covenant that they make between themselves, they become 2 halves of one whole. They are whole together, and each is incomplete without the other. It is one life, 2 halves of one whole. A covenant is a giving of oneself, and a mutual giving of oneself. And so God, he wants to make a covenant with the Israelite people, not just an agreement. He says, listen to me, and you will be my own people. You will be my treasured possession. You will be a priestly people. You will be a holy nation. You will belong to me, and I will belong to you. I will be your God. I belong to you, and you will belong to me, and we will form one. We will be one. This is what the book of Exodus tells us in chapter 19, verses 3 and following. Moses went up to God, it says, and the Lord called him from the mountain, saying, This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob and explain to the Israelites. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you listen to me and keep my covenant, you shall be my very own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, but you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So this is what God he wants to do. He wants to make this covenant with the Israelites. It's a kind of marital relationship. And if we want to understand the God of the Israelites, how they experience God, this is pivotal. This is the most important. This is most important for us to understand. We can't understand the Old Testament, we can't understand the Bible at all unless we see that God is the God of the covenant. He is the one who has chosen Israel. And He is the one who wants to make Israel His own special people, whom He will care for in a special way and love and nourish. The center of the Old Testament, we want to understand the Old Testament, I want to understand how the Israelites saw God. We must study that chapter 19 and 20 of the book of Exodus. That is the marriage between Israel and God and Israel. He has been joined to them in an indissoluble union. They will always be His people. He will never abandon them. He will be faithful to them, even if they are not faithful to Him. And so if we want to understand the Old Testament, as we do, what goes before is preparatory to this covenant making on Mount Sinai. We see God's choice of Abraham and Israel through Abraham. God chooses Abraham, and it is his children, from his seed, that the Israelite people will come. God promises Abraham, who is half dead, he's 75, he has no children, his wife is old, but God has chosen him, and there is nothing impossible to God. And God promises Abraham a nation as great as the sands on the seashore and as the stars in the heaven. And these are the children of Abraham, and God is going to make them His own people. So what goes before is God's choice and love for Israel, and He rescues them from slavery in Egypt, liberates them, and through this liberation from slavery, the Israelites learn to trust God, to believe in God. I am the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery, God says to them, book of Exodus. And so you can trust me, you can believe in me, and you can commit yourselves to me, because I am a faithful God, and I have done this for you already. So what comes before is a preparation for the covenant. And what comes after it? The rest of the Bible, Old Testament, is the story of the marriage of God and Israel. And it's a stormy marriage, if ever there was one. God is always faithful in love, but Israel is unfaithful and adulterous. But God will not give up His people. They are always his treasured possession. He will not abandon his people, even though they abandon him. We must read the Old Testament in the light of the covenant. Everything that happens is a result of their being faithful or unfaithful. A covenant is such that if one party is faithful and the other is unfaithful, we just can't say, that's it, I'm going away. No, a covenant is forever. And so we see in the book of Hosea how God says, I am going to allure her, lead her once more into the desert. He's talking of Israel, where I can speak to her tenderly. Then I will give back her vineyards, make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will answer me as in her youth, that when she was married to God on Mount Sinai. On that day, says the Lord, she will call me my husband, and never again call me by Baal. Baal is master, which the people of that area used to call their false gods. I will betroth myself forever to her. I will betroth you to myself forever. I will betroth you in justice and integrity, in love and tenderness. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will come to know the Lord. And so, this is how we must understand the Old Testament and understand how the Jews saw God. He is the God of the covenant who has chosen Israel and will never abandon them. And so, in the Old Testament, God is not a distant God, created this world, went away. He's not a God who is aloof and unconcerned. No, he is a God who has an intimate relationship with his people. They are his precious possession. It's like a marriage. He has chosen Israel and given himself to Israel. And the Israelite people on Mount Sinai gave themselves to him. Unfortunately, later on, they were unfaithful time and time again, and the prophets had to scold and to reprimand the people. But God never abandoned them. Even when they had to go into exile in Babylon, God did not abandon them. He brought them back to the land of Israel. God bless you.